Hi everyone, I'm Joanna Cena and welcome to today's session on differentiated core reading instruction in small groups. The last time you were all together, you learned a lot about reading development and theory from Kristen. And today my goal is to share with you some models and strategies for applying what you've learned to your classroom instruction. So our objectives for today are we were going to review the components of Tier 1 core reading instruction. We're going to give you a chance to analyze different models of small group instruction and share what those might look like, and discuss a plan for small group instruction. So you'll be able to discuss and actually plan some small group lessons during our time together today. So just to review and connect the learning from the last time you were together about core reading instruction, I want to remind you that core reading instruction includes research-based instructional practices in phonics, phonemic awareness, fluency, comprehension, and vocabulary. The instructional time allows for both explicit instruction and a lot of student practice. And we do that through a lot of different models of small group instruction and center work. So we want to make sure that the core reading instruction is vertically aligned and it follows a scope and sequence of skills, of unit skills and strategies, so that there aren't gaps in the learning and that we have a systematic approach to teaching reading, and that we're using ongoing formative and summative assessments to determine the instructional needs of our students. So many of you asked for examples of what a core reading instructional time might look like. Now, research suggests that 90 minutes of instruction is really the best model and the effective amount of time for literacy instruction, but we know that that's not always the reality, and especially not in the schools where you are right now. So in thinking about a 60-minute block of time, really what we're thinking about is a short mini lesson, so that would be 12 to 15 minutes where there's explicit teaching, and that's really addressing the whole group, but also knowing that that's not going to be exactly what every student needs. But the explicit teaching point is going to be focused on a skill or strategy in the areas of the big five, the phonics, fluency, comprehension, and vocabulary. And then you break out into independent small group work time, and that's usually about 30 to 40 minutes where kids are practicing the work independently in partner work in centers, and then the teacher is working with small groups. That happens for the majority of the reading time. And then at the very end, there's a 5 to 10 minute share out of the learning that's happened during the independent time. So let's talk about what the mini lesson really looks like. So the mini lesson should be short and focused, because we know that the objective of the lesson is not exactly what every student needs, and we really want to get to that time where we can differentiate for what kids really need. We want to make sure that the language is concise and clear, especially for our English learners. We want the teaching point to be crystal clear as today I'm going to teach you that. Today I'm going to teach you that good readers do, and then you name the strategy. We want to make sure that the teacher is teaching that skill through direct instruction, through modeling, and through demonstration, so that the teacher is showing kids what that looks like. So you're modeling the strategies for word recognition, comprehension, vocabulary, using mentor texts or texts that kids are familiar with. That can also be done through an interactive read aloud or shared reading. So the teacher is engaging students in active practice of the skill before they go off to work independently, but this is really the time when the teacher is doing the teaching. So although we want kids to practice before they go off and have a little bit of discussion, it's not the time where we have kids doing a lot of sharing, because we want to get them into the practice work, because we know that's the most effective use of their time. Teachers are also highlighting key vocabulary with pictures and charts with visuals, so that your ELLs are following along, or all of your students are following what the strategies are that you're teaching, and then how to apply that in their learning. And it's a tool that kids can come back to. So we want to make sure that those are clear charts with visual representations of the skills and the strategy work. And here are some examples here of what that might look like. So you can see that we have a chart here where we're looking at giving clues for kids to look at the picture, to look at the first letter of the word, and then to ask themselves, does that make sense? We also, a kindergarten unit is really that kids are super readers, and so that there are skills, superpowers that readers have. The one-to-one correspondence of pointing under words, using pictures, using letters to help them, and popcorn words, which are high-frequency words. another example of just how important it is to use visuals, and that you can use words, but also that there's just a quick picture. It doesn't need to be beautiful artwork, but that there's some sort of visual representation of what you're asking kids to do. So we know that one size does not fit all, and I know many of you have probably struggled with the range of students that you have in your class, the levels that you have, the language levels, and you really, I know there's not a teacher out there that's not struggling with how to meet the needs of all of their kids, and that's really where the importance of small group instruction comes in. So really, in order to most effectively meet the needs of all of your students, small group instruction should be happening and should be strategic in terms of how we plan and how we teach small group instruction. So teachers should be meeting with 2 to 3 small groups of 4 to 6 students every single day. And oftentimes in the beginning, teachers worry about being able to fit that in, but the idea is that it's a short amount of time. There's explicit teaching of a skill or strategy, and it's specific to what that small group of students need. So it's not following a specific program of guided reading, or it's really being responsive to what that group of students need. So it's keeping a quick pace, high engagement, 10 minutes. The group should be able to, you should be able to get to the teaching in 10 minutes, and that those groups are flexible and they're changing on a regular basis. And that's because teachers are monitoring and assessing what students are doing. So they're taking notes, they're listening in, and they're planning the groups. Now that takes some time getting used to how to do that and to be able to plan quickly for those small groups. We want to make sure that kids are leaving then with a clear next step. So when they leave the small group, they go off to work independently and they have a specific skill that they're focusing on. So teachers always ask me, so what is the rest of the class doing during this independent time? And this is really an important part of a workshop model, because if you're going to do small groups, the rest of the class has to be working on something. And so we know that we really want kids practicing reading skills as much as possible, because we know if you're learning a sport or if you're practicing learning a new instrument, it's not necessarily it's not talking about riding a bike or learning a new instrument that really makes you better at doing that. It's actually practicing riding a bike or practicing learning a new instrument. And that's what we want kids to be doing, is really practicing this work. But the only way that that's going to be effective is that kids are practicing at their independent level. So they are working with familiar texts that they've seen, that are it's at their level that they can access. There's predictable text for kids who need that predictability to read the text. They're working with reading partners that are strategic partners so that kids can work and prompt one another. And the explicit routines are set up that kids know how to work in those partnerships or work independently. So, and there's also a time for working with small center work. So that means that they could be working on phonics, word work, phonemic awareness, where that could be a center where kids are working on that practice if they're not independent readers at that point. But again, the idea is that we want kids practicing as much as possible. So here's just a picture of a classroom at my school. And again, this isn't a polished picture. They didn't know I was coming in. But this is a chance for you to see what independent reading looks like. Now, this is kids right now. It's midway through the year or more than that, so kids are able to read independently. There are 2 teachers who are working with small groups. You can see one teacher has 2 students, one has 3. In this particular time period, each of those teachers saw 3 groups. So they're quick, and some they're assessing, and they're leaving kids with next steps. So they're able to really get through their entire class during the time. So kids are not sitting reading by themselves for that entire independent time. They're reading with a teacher, or they are reading with partners in that small group work. Okay, so the idea around of working towards the small group work is that we're moving kids to independence. So we know that the mini lesson is really that demonstration of teacher modeling the expected strategy or the skill They're modeling that think aloud, so they're showing the thinking work to kids. So they're providing a lot of scaffolding. And then we're moving into that guided work and that guided practice. And that's where that small group work is, because we want to move kids to be able to do this work independently. That's the goal, is that we want independent readers. And this is really based on some of the theories from Piaget and Vygotsky around the cognitive structures and schema, that how are we creating possibilities for kids to be sharing together, working, showing their thinking, talking about their thinking with their peers and with their teachers, so that they can then move along to independence. So there's starting with really focused and explicit lessons, moving into guided practice and the small group work, and then leaving kids with skills, with specific tools to then take that into their independent work and go into practice. So that's really the idea of the mini lesson, and then moving into small group work, and then providing those collaborative learning opportunities for kids to be working in partnerships and in those small groups to be practicing the work with support before they move to independence. So I want you to turn and talk at this point. I've given you a little bit of information around sort of the overall structure of both the mini lesson and the potential for small group work. And I want you to think about and talk with a partner about, how are you currently structuring your core reading time in terms of the minutes throughout your 60 minutes, if that's what you have, and how are you currently planning for small group instruction? And what questions or thoughts are coming up as I'm talking? So I want you to take a minute, turn to your partner, and talk about these things. You can stop the video here, and I'll join you back in a minute. Okay, so now I'm going to talk to you about the five different reading small group models. Okay, so I'll be walking you through the specifics of each of these, but we'll be talking about direct instruction, and that's especially good when you're talking or teaching phonics, phonemic awareness, vocabulary. Then we'll move into talking about guided reading, and that's usually the most common small group format or model that teachers are familiar with. We'll talk about shared reading and what that can look like in a small group. We'll look at strategy groups, and so those are groups when you don't have to be pulling when working with kids on a specific level, that those can be kids of a variety of different levels and providing different models for kids, so they're not also feeling like they're always in a specific group, either it being low or higher level of reading. And then looking at vocabulary and grammar focused groups, and building on, especially for English learners working in international environments, how do we build that academic English language? Okay, so thinking about this first group of really direct instruction. And there is a time when you really want a small group to be focused on an explicit skill, direct instruction, and kids are practicing that skill repeatedly and getting repeated feedback. And that's especially good when you're focusing on explicit skills like phonics and phonological awareness, where you're teaching specific skills to kids. And so what that might look like is that a teacher is demonstrating and modeling the skill. It could look like sorting with guided practice with the teacher, sorting pictures or objects by sound or sound. So it's not just sorting words where kids are looking at the word pattern, but actually sorting sounds of objects or pictures that start with a particular sound or have a particular blend in the word. Activities for sound segmenting in words, so that kids might move a chip into a box for each. If you see the picture down below of the hat, where the teacher might say at, and the students have to move a chip into each box to identify or segment the sounds in the word hat, that they would then be able to tell you that in hat the sounds are at, so they're actually breaking down the sounds of that word. Then we're asking kids to blend the sounds together, so the teacher might say the difference, the letters, sounds in each word, and that the kids are blending those sounds together. And oftentimes with direct instruction, it's really teachers are signaling, kids are responding, it's fast-paced, and it's a lot of practice. Kids are getting corrected, and they're getting ongoing practice for those really explicit skills. This can also be done in a center where kids are working on this type of activity, or many different types of phonics or phonemic awareness activities, word work types of activities where they can do those with partners or in small groups in centers. And so that's a nice activity to be doing strategically planning for during your small group time. So now moving on to the structure of guided reading. So this is guided reading is has been something that's been around for a long time. It was introduced in the 70s by Fontes and Pinnell, and it's based on a lot of different reading theories. But really, it's evolved over the years in terms of how it's structured, and we really want to make sure that the guided reading lesson is strategically planned and based on skills that students need, or teachers are listening in to listen for the next skill that kids need in the guided in that particular level. So it's really looking at what are the features of a particular level and how are we building kids and moving them up to the next level. So what are the skills that they need to be able to access the next level of text, and how do we get them there? So students in guided reading are working with the same text, and the text is at an instructional level. So that means that the text is slightly above their independent level, so that it poses a few more challenges of the things that you want them to be working on and practicing, so that they can, with the scaffolding, to move them up into the next level. So usually that starts with a picture walk, an introduction of the book and a picture walk, highlighting of new vocabulary and particular text features that might be new in the text that they're reading. And then kids are going to go ahead and start reading. And so teachers are going to be listening in to determine the possible teaching point. What are they noticing that kids are doing as they're reading? And so teachers will be coaching students, and they'll coach students based on their individual needs. So they're listening in, coaching, listening in, coaching. So after the reading, there will be a short discussion and a teaching point. So now remember, readers, when you're reading, this is something to pay attention to. They'll give them a specific they'll do a guided practice or demonstration for kids to practice the skill that the teacher noticed that they really need, and then the teacher will send them off to work. So they'll go and then practice the work that they just did in their own independent text that they have at their desk. So again, this is with the idea that kids are working with a number of texts, different types of texts at their independent level during that independent time. So the next group structure is shared reading. So this is just slightly different, and shared reading is something that can be done whole group, and it also can be done small group. And the idea around shared reading is that it's a method. This is a method that's been around for quite a while, and it's a method that's where a teacher is using an enlarged text or one text, so that all kids have their eyes on the text and are reading in unison. And so when kids are reading in unison, the teacher is then hearing, the students are hearing other students read. So there's the model there, and that the teacher's able to hear where kids are struggling with the reading. So the teacher's focusing on working with students who have a similar needs. So they might be working with students who are paying attention to punctuation as they read, for example, or phrasing across multiple lines of text. So the teacher will select the specific text that will set students up to do that particular skill that they're hoping to move them towards. It's also giving teachers a chance or students to work on their fluency. And so the teacher's going to be looking for anticipating the struggles that kids might have and how they might respond to the miscues and errors in the fluency. So the structure of the lesson is they start with the teacher starts with a compliment. So readers, what I notice that you're doing in your reading is, so you want to start with a compliment so that you're giving kids really specific feedback, and that kids know why, then the next step of why you've pulled them together. So you're going to clearly state your teaching point and how you're going to accomplish that point together. So what you're going to do to teach them. Okay, so you are then going to read the shared text together, and that you'll be coaching students along the way. So you're offering tips and suggestions and directives based on the needs of the students. Okay, so then you're going to, after they've done the shared reading together, you might have highlighted particular words, vocabulary, or prompted them to use some word guessing strategies, and then you're going to recap the work that was done, restating the strategy that was used, and you're going to send students off with a reminder at the next step as they practice. So when you go back to reading, remember that good readers pay attention to punctuation or something, depending on what your teaching point is. So again, this is the same text all kids are reading, and this is a traditional choral reading, but that it's really specific to what you're hearing coming up with kids as they're reading, and there's a clear teaching point. So the next lesson structure is strategy, as a strategy lesson or strategy group. So this is a time for students to practice new strategies or to receive support with a strategy that they're working on, but it doesn't necessarily have to be taught at the same text level, which allows you to group students differently. And I think this is useful for kids who might be thinking that they are always grouped with the lower readers or kids who are struggling, or they're starting to notice that. So this is a way that you don't always need to group kids by level, and that you can group kids specifically by a strategy that kids need support with, and that can be in any level of text. So kids are going to come with their own independent texts, and you're going to start again with a complement, and just to remind you about the research around starting with a complement, Peter Johnston refers to this as noticing and naming. He brings up in his book Choice Words. This is something that really gives kids that immediate feedback and specific feedback to what they're doing well. So you might say something like, I notice that when you're reading and you get to a tricky word, you stop and think, what would make sense here? And then you look at the beginning letter. And then after you've complimented students, and you move them on to the teaching point. And so you might say then, so today I'm going to teach you to look at the beginning letters of the words and also look at the ending to help you figure out what the word might be. And then ask yourself, would this make sense? So that might be that's a very basic teaching point, but a strategy group might also be focusing on stopping and asking yourself, does that make sense? And going back and rereading if that doesn't make sense. So comprehension strategy for monitoring. So that's the format of the lesson, is that you give them the clear teaching point, an explanation with an example. You might be doing that in your own text. And then you ask students to give that strategy a try in their reading. And so you're listening in. It could be, again, in a shared text or in their own independent reading, or maybe even in their own independent writing. So you're encouraging kids to get to work, and you're reminding students to keep reading while you're coaching other students with that particular strategy that they're working on. And you're going to give kids multiple teaching points in that particular strategy. So you're going to keep reminding them and prompting them, so they're getting ongoing reminders of the skill that they're working on. And then you send them off to say, okay, as you go off to your own independent reading, I want you to remember that. And then you restate the teaching point. So again, the strategy lesson is a strategy group. It's not based on level, but it's based on a particular reading strategy that group of kids needs. Again, this could be something where this group might meet only twice. You might say, okay, these kids need a little bit more support with how to retell what they've just read, or it might just be paying attention to punctuation, as we mentioned. Okay, so this next group is thinking about vocabulary instruction. So as we know, vocabulary is one of the most challenging and most critical things to be teaching, because it's so highly correlated to reading comprehension. And we also know in international schools, we're working with kids who are speaking multiple languages. And so we really need to be focusing explicitly on how we are teaching vocabulary to our students and how we're being explicit about that vocabulary instruction. And there's lots of different ways that we're going to build vocabulary in our classrooms by creating visual word walls and having the charts and the picture cues around the room. But we also know that it's very important that that's one way that kids are going to acquire vocabulary, but the other way is through explicit instruction. And so Isabel Beck's work really has focused on how you determine which words to teach. So there are 3 tiers of vocabulary words that you can choose from. So if you think about tier one, those are your basic words that kids are most likely going to pick up. Girl, table, book. Those are things that kids, there are lots of context clues, very basic words that they can acquire through social and informal language. But really looking at then moving to tier two words, those are the academic words, and those are the words that kids are going to encounter. They're not going to encounter in their everyday world, but they're going to encounter these words in multiple academic contexts. And so we want to make sure that we're being selective about which words to teach and thinking about those high leverage words. Which words are they going to need to know to access content, access knowledge, and how do we explicitly teach those words, select those words and teach those words. So thinking about when you're choosing a text, highlighting words that kids are really going to need to know to comprehend the text, and they're going to need to know those in other academic areas. Now, tier three words are those really content specific words that are not words that kids are going to be using on an ongoing basis or are going to encounter. They're very specific words that you might need to just give them a quick definition of a word where they might encounter that in a text, and that might inhibit their comprehension of the text. But otherwise, you're really going to be focusing on selecting tier two words. We want to make sure that we are providing in that small group, which again is a quick group that could be a vocabulary group that could be connected with a guided reading or shared reading group where you're going to pre-teach selected vocabulary words using student-friendly definitions of the word with pictures. You're going to provide context and examples of how the word is used in a variety of contexts, in different sentences, different examples. And you're going to also teach kids word learning strategies when they're encountering unfamiliar words. So you can only teach them so many vocabulary words, but we also need to give them the word learning strategies so that they know what to do when they encounter an unfamiliar word. So this could be anything from looking at the context clues. It could be looking at cognates, looking for words words within a word, so that we're really teaching kids specific strategies for understanding unfamiliar words. So we want to give kids guided practice with a particular vocabulary lesson, have students practice using the new words multiple times with partners in discussion, providing sentence stems if necessary. So this is something that I'll also talk a little bit about in our session around English language learners, but really looking at providing kids with the sentence stems to sort of hang those new vocabulary words on, so we can give them the words to put them into sentences and give them lots of opportunities to practice. And so that's one of the really key pieces of the vocabulary small group lessons. Okay, so now I'd like for you to take a minute and turn and talk to your partner. And I want you to think about your class data. So I know that you have your DIBELS data, but it's also what you know about your students as readers. In addition to your DIBELS reading data, what you've seen through your work with students, your informal and ongoing assessments, running records, your conversations with kids. And I want you to discuss with your partner how you've grouped your students into small groups, and how have you determined the instructional focus of those groups? What are the resources that you use? What are the types of ways that you determine what you're going to teach during that time? And thinking about the information that I've just shared with you, are there any changes that you might consider? Are there some things that that have been brought to your attention that you might consider in terms of planning for small group instruction? So take a few minutes and talk to your partner, stop the video, and we'll come back together after you've had that conversation. Okay, so you've had a time to talk with your partner about how you plan for small group instruction. And so I'm going to walk through, again, the types of planning tools that you'll need when thinking about small group instruction. And I can't emphasize this enough, is that really the importance of planning for small group instruction. I notice that teachers spend a lot of time planning for the mini lesson or the whole group lesson, but I find that really the most important planning is the small groups, because those are the specific skills that kids need to learn to move them along in their reading development. The whole group lesson is going to meet the needs of the majority of your kids, but not all. So in planning for small group instruction, you're going to look at the data that you have. So again, you have your DIBELS data, you have curriculum-based assessments and running records, so you've also been listening in to readers and noticing what sort of miscues and errors they're making when they're reading. You also need to be thinking about the language level of your students and any language assessments you have to really understand the potential vocabulary needs of your students and the language needs in terms of how can you build that language development as you're working with reading skills. So knowing what language assessments you have available. And then additional informal and formative assessments, pre-assessments or learning progression. So taking all of those things into account as you're planning for your small groups and thinking, okay, what are these students doing well? What is the student attempting to do here? And what do the students need to do to move them to the next level? And so setting that clear objective and asking yourself, okay, I'm going to be focusing on this group needs some of the foundational skills, and I'll be focusing on phonics or word work, phonemic awareness. Or these kids might be needing a guided reading group to be working on some comprehension skills or some fluency. Or I might choose to do a shared reading group with this level of students because they need the repeated practice and I want to be focusing on some fluency work as they're reading and also some word meaning work with them. So that might be the way that you're looking at all of your data to think about what are the needs of my students and how might I group them over a week's time or over 2 weeks' time to really see them the most amount of time and to really address their specific needs. And there's some tools we use and some tips that I want to share with you. One of the most important tips is that the groups should be short, 10 to 15 minutes. And that planning time technically should not take longer than the length of the group. I know that's hard because as teachers we're perfectionists that we want to make sure that we're well planned and we've thought everything through. But if we were to we want teachers to be seeing as many groups as possible, and if you're spending an hour planning every small group lesson, it's just not sustainable to do that every day. And so really thinking about how can you quickly determine what the teaching point is, the text you're going to use, and a clear teaching point that you're going to be working on. So we've used some tools, the continuum of literacy learning. This is a nice tool that allows you to see the features at each different reading level. And so what are some of the potential teaching points and skills that will move students to the next level and some potential teaching points. Teaching Reading in Small Groups with Jennifer Saravello is a book that we've used to plan for strategy groups and small guided practice groups. Those are a couple of tools. There are a lot of tools out there, many different small group planning tools that you can use. So now it's time for you to do some planning. I have provided a couple of different tools. So with a partner, I would like for you to reflect, first of all, on how you are currently structuring your small group time during your core reading instruction. And then the practicing of the planning for at least 3 small groups. So if you look at this next slide here, so what I've shown you, and I've posted this in Schoology, is that I'd like for you to just go through and think about the number of times of groups that you see per week for guided reading, shared reading, strategy groups, centers, and language-specific groups. The number of minutes per group, the number of students in the group, the reading levels, and the current focus. So what is the instructional focus that you're working on with those groups? So just sort of a reflection and a conversation around what is this currently looking like? Because these models that I've shared with you today might be very different than what you're doing in your classroom now. And so thinking about, okay, based on what you've learned, thinking about planning for groups coming up next week, for example. What is a skill or strategy focus that you might be working on with a particular group of students? Practice thinking through what would a teaching point be? What title of book might I use with them? So a guided reading or a set of books or a shared reading text. What's the level of that text? And then am I going to do guided, shared, strategy, or language word work type of group? The days that you would like to meet with those kids, so planning out, okay, I could see this group Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, or depending on your schedule and your time, how many days a week could you see this group? And then the students that you imagine being in that group. Okay, so I want you to take some time and work with your team, your grade level partner, or just with a partner that's working on this as well, and talk through both the reflection piece and the group planning. Okay, so I'm sure a lot of questions have come up or some ideas have come up. So I'd like for you to take some time and in Schoology, if you wouldn't mind, on the either the Google form that Ralph will share with you, or in Schoology, I'll post a document that will allow you to post some questions and to provide feedback of where you might need additional support, so that I can help as you either refine the small group work that you're already doing, or if you have questions about how to get this started in your school. All right, thanks so much for your time and good luck with the planning.